All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Teaching with Integrity, Building an Ethical AI Strategy for Education. Just while everyone funnels into the room, I'm going to take care of some housekeeping up front. So just a few things to get out of the way. If I could get the next slide, please, Barbara. So just so you all know, the recording of this webinar is going to be shared with everybody within 2 days. You can always go and see the recordings of all of our webinars at packback.co/webinar. Please ask all questions with the Q&A feature. As much as I would like to be able to monitor the chat while doing this, I am bad at multitasking and it would negatively impact your experience of the rest of this webinar were I to try. That said, please do feel free to use the chat for discussion and sharing. We leave it completely open for people to chat. In fact, maybe a good way to start is, if you have any interest in doing so, just post who you are and where you're calling in from. And we are going to have Packback team members monitoring the Q&A and the chat to share resources. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'm delighted to turn the microphone over to Dr. Rufus Glasper from the League for Innovation in the Community College to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Craig. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Rufus Glasper, President and CEO of the League for Innovation in the Community College. The League is excited to partner with Packback on this human-centered AI in higher education series. In my years in education, I've never seen a single topic arrive with such force and with such profound implications for everything we do. We find ourselves at a genuine inflection point. Every leader and every educator is feeling this pressure and anxiety. This technology is moving at a breathtaking pace. And with that speed comes a lot of noise, a lot of hype, a lot of promises, and frankly, a lot of fear. But not fear of missing out, it's fear of messing up. We're all grappling with the same fundamental questions. What does this mean for our institutions? What does this mean for our classrooms? And most importantly, what does this mean for our students? We're trying to find our footing, asking what's allowed, what's ethical, and what works. That is why this conversation is so essential. This entire series is timely. But this session today, Teaching with Integrity, gets to the very heart of the matter. It's not enough to simply understand what AI is. The real work, the work that will define the next decade of education, is deciding how we will use it. How do we build an ethical strategy from ground up? How do we lead with our values and our pedagogy, not just be pulled along by the technology? How do we ensure that we keep the humans, both the educator and the student, at the absolute center of this new world? During our partnership, I have watched Packback navigate the changes in this technology and, as appropriate, its relationships with our colleges. Their thoughtful, research-backed, and pedagogy-first approach is exactly what the education community needs right now. They aren't just building generative AI tools with education wrappers. They are helping colleges build frameworks and find the clarity to make intentional, evidence-based decisions. So to guide us in this critical work today, let me introduce our expert panelists. We have Packback's Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Craig Booth, and their Senior AI Product Manager, Barbara Kinney, and they are on the forefront of this work, and I look forward to their insights. Craig and Barbara, thank you for leading this charge. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Rufus. And I figure the best way for us to start this, for anyone who was not here last time, is just, I think Barbara and I can just give a very quick intro into who we are. Barbara, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you, Craig, and thank you, Rufus. My name is Barbara Kenny. I'm a senior product manager here at Packback. But before joining tech, I was an educator for 10 years. I have my master's in education. I left the classroom in 2021 to study web development and quickly learned that I really liked thinking about how we incorporate tech into education more than physically building it. And so that led me here to Packback and working with Craig and Oliver here. So yeah, glad to be here.
Great. And my name's Craig Booth, Packback's CTO. I think where I'm going to start today is I feel extremely blessed to be here. I'm a first generation college student in my family, and it is thanks to the education system and a series of good teachers and instructors that I get to be here doing this at all. And that includes, for the past 7 years, building AI for EdTech in a pedagogy-focused way. We're also joined by Oliver, who is going to be manning the Q&A and asking questions. Oliver, do you want to say a quick hi?
Hello. Hi, I'm Oliver Short. I'm our director of product and design, work very closely with both Barbara and Craig on the features and functionality inside of the Packback platform. I've spent about 8.5, almost 9 years now, hard to believe, working in education technology in small companies and in large companies across higher ed and K-12. So if you have some questions as we go through the content today and talk about the ethical framework, please drop those into the chat or into the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring it as we go, but just delighted to be here today and very excited for this talk.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. And let's start just by asking the question, why this and why now? I think Rufus covered this really, really well in his introduction. So I want to start by asking a question of everybody. And that question, if we can jump forward a slide, is a poll, should pop up right now. And I'd like to ask everybody, how comfortable would you feel relying on your institution's AI policy to navigate some sort of difficult situation? And I'll come back to the answers to this in a couple of slides, because I think we're in an interesting place in the world right now, if we can jump forward a slide, which is, like Rufus alluded to, everybody is under pressure. So I know in the room right now we have instructors and administrators, and y'all are feeling it from all sides. Every week brings new tools to deal with. There is not yet sometimes very clear guidance on what's allowed and what works. And no matter what we do, students are using AI right now with or without guidance. And similarly, from the administrative side of the house, there's pressure from faculty, from students, from accreditors. There are dozens and dozens of tools in the market claiming impact. How do you know which ones are real and which ones are not? There are equity concerns with AI that we're going to get into in some detail today. And reputation and trust is a part of this. Am I and my institution behind the curve? Or even worse, am I irresponsibly doing things quickly? So just to ground this webinar, our intention for this series is not to tell you what to think about AI. We really just want to help have the conversation and to give you a foundation for making your own intentional and evidence-based decisions about it. So in part one, if I had to summarize part one of this webinar series, these all stand alone, but together they will tell a story. Part one was really just, what is AI? With that out of the way, we're now in part two, which is, how do I use AI ethically? And then from here, we're going to move into, how do I use it well and effectively? But part two, teaching with integrity, building an ethical AI strategy for education. So I would be curious to see the poll results at this point. And just while I wait for them to pop up, I will just give a quick recap of part one. So in part one, we introduced the wide spectrum of things that are AI. I think it's very easy to mistakenly think AI equals ChatGPT at this point in time, and that couldn't be further from the truth. There are a massive array of techniques that are applicable in different domains, from simple rule-based systems through machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, and then generative AI, this new thing that everybody is talking about, is just like the latest iteration of AI. The second thing is, I think it's important, especially when interacting with generative AI, never to forget that just because it sounds fluent doesn't mean it understands. At its core, an AI is an empty shell, not a human being. And that we need to be careful to match the tools to the tasks. So if you're doing something incredibly high stakes, feeding it into a generative AI black box is probably a bad idea. So if any of this caught your attention, you can go back and watch the part 1 of this webinar series. Other than that, this one, like I said, does stand alone. So I don't know if everyone else can see the results of the poll or if it's just me, but we got, I will let you know that 2% of people would feel comfortable relying on their institution's AI policy to navigate a difficult situation, with the vast majority of people sitting in the somewhat uncomfortable and uncomfortable range. And that actually, I think, is the perfect intro to this webinar. So it's structured as follows. We're going to start by talking about values, because the core of this is values. I think it's easy to think of a policy as a piece of paper full of rules that we follow. It's not. It's rooted in values. So we're going to start from there, values and principles and how they feed into things. From there, we're actually going to take a look at some AI, and Barbara is going to lead a session that we've titled Peeking Inside the Black Box. In part 3, we're going to make it a lot less abstract than values and principles. We're going to pull these two things together and actually get into policy and practice. And then in part 4, one of the key parts of this is empowering humans. And Barbara is going to run a session that we've titled The Human Loop, about keeping people accountable and in charge. So let's get started, from values to governance. Again, I don't like to think of policies as pieces of paper full of rules that we have to follow. They're actually rooted in something. And the thing that they're rooted in, first and foremost, is values. Values are those things that we stand for, those big ideas that we stand for. And values come into the world in the form of principles, which are how we live those values in action. So a couple of non-EdTech examples. If I were an automotive engineer, my value might be reliability. And the principle by which I action that value is to design systems that fail safely with redundant layers. If I were working in healthcare, one thing I may value might be compassion. And then the way that I action this in real life is that I deliver care in ways that can minimize suffering and preserve dignity. So these big abstract values made into more concrete principles. And then these principles written down are policies. So when you're reading a policy, they can feel dry, they can feel boring, but really they are the written expression of your values. Now, I absolutely don't want to sit here and be somebody who is trying to tell you what your values should be. I am woefully underqualified to do that for anybody. And in fact, nobody can tell you what your values should be. They're not a thing that's handed down. They're a thing that are named and owned by the community that they guide. And as people, as educators or people working in education, we have the ability to have huge positive or negative impacts on students. And this is important stuff. I've pulled here a quote. So this is from a paper from 1989, from the very second ever issue of the Journal of AI in Education. And here these authors make the case that AI people are in a unique position to improve education. ... We can couple our expertise in computer technology with theories of learning and build computer-based instructional systems that will have a positive impact in education. And I think this is absolutely true, that we have the capability to do valuable stuff for students. That said, there is a counterpoint to this, which is AI has a lot of downsides, a lot of potential downsides. There are privacy concerns, bias and discrimination concerns, surveillance, and lack of autonomy concerns. And the way I can think of, the way I always think of these, and this is just, I pulled this from a paper on AI and ethics, is that these are the inverse of values that you might have. You know, an AI invading someone's privacy is the opposite of the value of respecting them. An AI that is biased and discriminatory is the opposite of the value of equity. erosion of autonomy is the opposite of the value of agency and empowerment. So we very much need to choose our values. And then we can be good stewards of those values and ensure that what we're doing is much more from the first of these slides. So let's jump into principles. Like I said, I'm not smart enough to know what principles everybody should be using, but there's a lot of people trying to figure that out. Very many frameworks for principles of AI use are being developed across the entire world by governments, by intergovernmental organizations. The UN has one, UNESCO has one, the US government has one, the OECD has one, that's the Office for Economic Cooperation and Development. The EU has one. And the interesting thing is if you peel open all of these sets of principles, they are all very, very, very similar. They all cover human rights and dignity, fairness and non-discrimination, transparency and explainability, accountability and human oversight, safety, robustness, privacy, data governance, sustainability, and the environment. So I think what we have here is the beginnings of a consistent framework to reason about this stuff. So in order to get this into more of an edtech lens, I'm just going to take those 7 or 8 things and boil them down into 5 principles that I believe in and say a few words about each of those principles. So this is prioritizing the well-being of students, doing no harm, being a supplement for people, not a substitute, being transparent and explainable in plain language, and being held accountable by humans. So let's run through them. Prioritizing the well-being of students above all else. This, I think, is the principle that comes before all others. And the important point here that I'm going to linger on just for 1 second, then I'm going to go through the next 4 quite quickly, is that every algorithm and every AI use is an opinion. It is not, an ethically irrelevant thing. Like use of an AI constitutes an opinion about what counts as good writing, let's say, or what counts as engagement, or what patterns matter and what don't. And you are making decisions and you have responsibility related to all of this. And these opinions are encoded by the people who build the models and the data that they chose and the features they emphasize, the thresholds they set. So let's keep moving. Do no harm is the next big thing. And all systems are imperfect, but ethical systems demonstrate that they're actively working to reduce the harm that those imperfections cause. And what this means for principles for building is we must be continuously reducing bias. We must be continuously designing for the worst possible scenarios. We must be continuously protecting data and privacy. And institutions are not alone in this. On the right of the previous slide, there is actually a list of bills that are passing through the government at the moment about the use of AI and consequential decisions. Everyone's struggling with this. Let's go to the next slide. Next up, be a supplement for people, not a substitute. AI should not remove educators. We do not seek to replace them. We seek to augment and empower. And my favorite example of this is actually on the right. This is chess scores. So from 0 up to almost 4,000. The best human chess player at the moment is Magnus Carlsen with a score of 2882. The best machine chess player, at least as of a couple of years ago, was a system called Komodo at 3393. But the best chess players in the world are not humans and they're not machines. They're actually humans and machines working together, what's labeled on here as cyborgs. And that is what I see the job of AI being. AI is lacking in context and humanity, and its job should just be to augment, meaning to grow or intensify the capabilities of instructors. Let's jump to the next one. I'm not going to spend any time on this because we have a significant section on it, but it is necessary for AI, if it's being used to do anything important, to be transparent and explainable in plain language. And let's keep moving. And then finally, being held accountable by humans. There is no world in which we want to cede responsibility for education to a soulless machine. Decisions made by AI need to be validated by human oversight. AIs must defer to decisions made by people, and they should be transparent enough that they can be challenged and questioned by the people they serve. So to start this presentation off, I just wanted to run through these principles, and these are the things that we use internally to guide us while we're building. And I would invite people to reflect upon their own values and their own principles and what that means for you, and maybe how that's reflected in whatever AI policy you do have. And that brings us to the end of this section. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Barbara to actually talk about the nuts and bolts of this. So Barbara.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. Yeah, in this section, I want to talk a bit about kind of why we need these ethical AI strategies, how did we get here, and really focusing on that explainability piece. But first, I want to say that we've been here before, and it's not to minimize what feels very unique and urgent about AI technology in this moment, but just to acknowledge that the fear and uncertainty has been here before. It's not new. Plato worried that once the written word left the hand of the author, that it would circulate without context or defense. And centuries later, we had the same concern with the early internet, information traveling way faster and farther than we could verify it. In both, we have a fear of losing control of how ideas become connected to other ideas and this unsteadiness of not being able to see the reasoning behind it. And we're encountering this again with AI. Every major advance in information technology disrupts how people know what to trust, what to question, and how to interpret meaning. In the world of AI, we refer to this as interpretability, which is the degree to which a human can understand how the model reached the output. So explainable AI is the broader effort to design systems that make that reasoning visible. The symbolic systems of early AI were easy to interpret because they were built from explicit rules. But modern neural networks learn in ways that humans can't really inspect, and that tension is structural. As the complexity and capability goes up, interpretability goes down unless we intentionally build it back in. And I want to give a little bit of a backstory here, which will explain the silly image on this page. But in early AI research, there was essentially two camps. One believed that intelligence was fundamentally about knowledge. This was symbolic AI. If you want a computer to behave intelligently, you load it up with all the rules and all the facts, and those were the expert systems. They're predictable, explainable, but limited. The other camp, led by folks like Geoffrey Hinton, had a different view. They believed intelligence wasn't about being stuffed full of facts. It was about forming new connections on the information you take in. And this was referred to as connectionist AI. They basically said the intelligence to model is not that of the expert, it's that of the toddler. Toddlers don't come preloaded with a rule book. They experience the world, they poke at it, and their brains start forming these wild connections and networks of associations. And we don't get to peek inside those networks. We don't have a window into why a toddler suddenly knows how to stack blocks. But the connectionist theory gained popularity, and it gave rise to the neural networks. And neural networks gave rise to the LLMs. So when we talk about these modern models being opaque, this is why we chose the toddler path. We opted for a type of intelligence that emerges from patterns, not rules. And with that choice comes a trade-off. The expert systems, you know what it's going to do. You can more or less trust it. The LLM is the toddler. It's learning insanely fast, but it's absolutely the one that needs more supervision. And as the AI community tried to make these systems better, the next step was again to model it after the human brain, where we think it's, bigger is better, right? So they started to make these networks bigger, more nodes, more layers, more computations, which made them dramatically more capable, but made their reasoning even more limited. So today we really have two paths towards explainability. We choose models that are transparent by design, the expert systems, rule-based systems, or we apply explanation techniques to the complex models after the fact. So why does this explainability matter? Why do we care about this hidden reasoning? Imagine giving a student a final grade without weighted assignments or rubrics or feedback. Students would have no idea what mattered, what went wrong, or how to improve. teachers would be limited in how to adapt instruction to better support students. And that's kind of what these opaque AI systems are doing. If we don't build explainability back into them, we're giving people outputs without the reasoning. So explainable AI is like the grading rubric of AI technology. It gives us visibility into what mattered most, what could change the outcome, and how to improve next time. Another thing to touch on just briefly, and why explainability matters, is the idea of sycophancy, which I'm sure we've heard about, but it's this tendency of LLMs to mirror a user's assumption, correct or not. So that has the risk of deepening inequities in learning. Without transparency, that bias becomes invisible. In the chart you see here, models gave more inaccurate answers when students framed their questions with inaccurate assumptions. And we know meaning is co-constructed, both in human dialogue and now in human and AI dialogue. Explainability helps provide context for that co-construction. It's how we teach students to discern instead of defer. And discernment matters. When we're talking to another human being and they're sharing knowledge or giving feedback, we implicitly know what to do with that new information. We know their expertise, their tendencies, our histories, their values. We know how to place that new information, how to weight it. That's the type of discernment we've been practicing our whole lives. With AI, all that context disappears unless we intentionally surface it. And explainability is what signals us to build a mental model of the system, what it's good at, what it misses, and how much to trust it. And this image on the left just kind of highlights a few core purposes of explainability. It gives us the ability to justify, gives us control, the ability to improve these systems, and to discover, to reveal those hidden patterns so we can build upon them. And these matter, especially in applications of education, because we aren't just automating tasks, we're using it to support learning, which means we need visibility into the why. So I'm going to hand it back to Craig, who's going to tell us a little bit more about interpretable models.
Perfect. And all I really want to do here is just try to make it really concrete for everybody. So you can really reason about this by giving you a few examples of models. And this is one that's on the simpler side of things. It is a very simple model that can tell the difference between different species of the genus Iris. So you see a picture of an Iris versicolor, an Iris setosa, and an Iris virginica. You just work down this tree, essentially. So at the top, if the petal width is less than 0.8 centimeters, it's an Iris setosa. You can actually see that with your own eyes. If that's false, then you measure the petal length. Is it less than 4.95 centimeters? Then you look at the petal and sepal widths. So again, this is an example of a rules-based model, which can differentiate by simple measurements between 3 different species of iris. So this is very far on the simple and explainable side of things. If I show you an Iris virginica, I can tell you why I believe it's an Iris virginica. Let's step up the complexity a bit here. This is an old example at this point, but it's one of my favorites. Back in 2009, Netflix issued $1 million challenge. Netflix had developed an algorithm called Cinematch. That's the one where, you know, when you log in and it says people like you liked movies like this. They do this by predicting what rating you're going to give to other movies. And they had an algorithm called Cinematch that was accurate to within half a star 75% of the time. Netflix started this $1 million challenge and just said, you know, the winner is the person who can improve the Cinematch accuracy by the most. And the winning entry improved the accuracy of the model by 10%. So not a large increase in accuracy. And how did they do that? They did it by combining 107 different algorithms and adding them all together. So here at this point, you know, you can see this has suddenly got a lot more complicated and a lot harder to explain. Like if Netflix thinks I will give the new Transformers movie 3 out of 5, following this algorithm, do I have any idea why? Probably not. And then there is one more extreme example of this. So in part of my job as a CTO, I also deal with security and compliance. And one thing I have to do is something called SOC 2, which is essentially an audit that a company can go through to prove that it's well run. It stands for Service Organization Control. A few months ago, I was giving a presentation to the company where I wanted to talk about SOC 2 and just wanted some decorations for a slide. So I went and asked an AI, Midjourney in this case, just draw me a picture of SOC 2, expecting a computer with like a padlock on it or something. And it sort of showed me a picture of a Gothic bird. And I was like, well, that's weird. I'll do it again. And it showed me another picture of a Gothic bird. And no matter how many times I asked the AI to generate me something related to SOC 2, it would show me a Gothic bird. Do I have any idea why the AI decided to show me a Gothic bird for SOC 2? I do not. Does anybody have any idea why the AI decided to do that? They do not. So let's just put this into context. I'm about to hand the mic back to Barbara. So on this chart, you can see there is this flow chart on the left for classifying irises. As the model gets more complex, you move right on here, you hit Netflix, which has become hard to understand, but more complex and better. Then all the way off on the right, there is a picture of a goth bird. And I think this leads us to an interesting question about what does the word best mean? Barbara.
Yeah, I think when we think about the word best, we need to acknowledge that fundamental trade-off that Craig just illustrated. Those simple systems are easy to interpret, but they are limited. And the complex ones are powerful, but opaque. So there is no universal best model. The right model really depends on the stakes and the amount of visibility you need. Like the goth bird for Craig's presentation, it's pretty low stakes ask there. So, that's okay. But when we're dealing with education, we really need to understand those stakes before we choose the model. And we talked about that a lot in our first webinar. But I also think we need to consider this inverse relationship. As interpretability goes down, the need for that explainability we talked about and the need for AI literacy goes up. So back to that toddler analogy, if we choose the toddler, then we inherit the responsibility to supervise it. And part of that work is technical. It's building in explainability features into the technology itself. But the other part is educational. Students need support in learning how to question AI output, how to interpret it, how to place it along other sources they trust. And that's what allows them to practice that discernment. But all of this comes back to the values that shape the responsible use. What informs the decisions we make about what a tool, when a tool is appropriate, and what practices need to surround it. So I'm going to hand it back to Craig to walk us through how we move from principles to practice.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. So this is where I want things to start getting really concrete. We've talked about abstract things so far, values and principles. But principles only matter if you're able to be principled and to act on them. So principles in this space only matter insofar as they change what we decide to build, what we decide to buy, what we decide to approve, or what we decide to allow into a classroom. So over the next 5 slides, I'm actually going to run through the principles again. But this time I'm going to bring a more concrete and actionable lens to each of them. So I'm going to move from the high level into what might this actually mean in terms of how I should behave. So let's start with fairness. This is an expression of do no harm. What I would say here is there are 2 things that we really need to care about. The first is AI must not reinforce bias in grading, feedback, or content delivery. And what that means in a very concrete way is that systems need to be regularly audited to detect and correct inequitable patterns. On the right here, I would say don't worry too much about the details of this image. There's a lot of stuff in here, but this is essentially just a catalog of where bias can creep into the process in designing AI in education. And this is all the way through from like data selection, model training, user experience, and so on and so on and so on. So what I want you to take away from here is like, no system is perfect. There are hundreds of ways that bias can slip into a system without you seeing it. So I think the crucial takeaway here is we need to audit, we need to control for this. So that's fairness. Let's take one step further and talk about privacy and security, which I also think of as an expression of do no harm. Data can be misused. Somebody's personal data making it out onto the internet can be harmful in a multitude of ways, be it their personal data or things that they have written. And so when you're looking at edtech software, I think one of the key questions that you can be asking is, how do you use our data? And there are two key terms that I want to just give everybody to use going forward. They are purpose limitation and data minimization. So on the right here, these are various quotes from various privacy regulations. So Europe's GDPR, the California Privacy Rights Act, and then Brazil's General Personal Data Protection Law. So purpose limitation is the idea that a company or entity who you are giving data to is committing to only use it for a limited set of purposes. So in Packback's case, if you are entrusting us with a student's writing, we promise that we are only going to use that writing insofar as we need to deliver the platform to you. And then data minimization. The easiest way to avoid making a mistake with data is simply not to have it at all. So look for platforms that minimize the amount of data that they have. If a platform doesn't have data, they can't make mistakes with it. And again, I'm just going to tie this to myself and Packback again. We very much try to design every system that we have to minimize the amount of data that we require from any student user. So just think of these as like two tools or shortcuts you can use when talking potentially to an edtech vendor to figure out what they do with their data. Do they limit their usage of it, and do they minimize the amount of it that they collect? Let's jump to the next one. Let's talk about equity and inclusion for a second. So, I think a lot of the time it is extremely easy to build things for some mythical average student who doesn't truly exist. But the reality of the situation is we need to be honest about what reality looks like today. And just to give you some statistics on this, 25% of households with an income below 30K don't own a smartphone. 40% of those households lack broadband. So those students are extremely disadvantaged when it comes to interacting with an edtech platform, say. It is a minority of educators and learners who believe that AI creates a more equitable system out of the box. Less resource districts are about half as likely to provide teachers with AI training. So these already disadvantaged districts are falling further behind through lack of training. And AI does have the promise to make education more accessible to learners with disabilities, but only if designed inclusively. So that's what I mean when I say, let's be honest about the current reality. This mythical average learner does not truly exist. Our job is to serve everybody. And to make this really concrete and to put into things that you could or should be doing, can we just go back one slide? A few things. Requiring vendors to demonstrate accessibility support, not just compliance with some standard, but like meaningful usability for a diverse set of learners. Insist on low bandwidth, mobile friendly, multilingual, screen reader compatible experiences. These platforms, I think it's an ethical necessity, be available to the widest variety of students possible. Like any tool that assumes a high resource environment, an expensive laptop, a good phone, avoid them because many of your students just do not live in that world. Okay, let's jump to the next one. Transparency and explainability. This is the one that Barbara has talked about a lot already. But I think there are two pieces here. There is transparency separate from explainability. Users must know when an AI is being used. Very frequently, I would say nowadays, you likely interact with AIs and maybe don't even know that you're doing it. That you don't know that an algorithm is involved. And as I said all the way at the start, algorithms are opinions. And if you don't know that there's an algorithm hidden there, you can't question it. You can't possibly question it. You can't monitor it. You can't correct its mistakes. So it should be true that AI is used transparently, like tooltips that say generated by AI or this is AI. You need to know it's being used. And when an AI is making consequential decisions, and Barbara is going to dive into some of the failure modes of this in a minute, those results must always, always, always be explainable. And I've got some examples on the right. Amazon built a system for recruiting, which showed bias against women because it was trained on men's resumes. That in the medical space, certain minorities would be underdiagnosed on chest radiographs just because the training data that went in did not represent them at all. In healthcare, AI and prior authorization denials, again, all of these things are opinions of the people who built the system. And if you don't know that they're in there, like, you can't possibly disagree with or debate those opinions. Let's and then the final one, the probably I'd say most critical one, human oversight. That AI is just a shell. If you are here for the first session where we talked about how large language models actually work, probably the fairest way to describe them is that they're turbocharged autocomplete built off of a massive corpus of data. They don't have context. They don't have humanity. And that necessitates that educators, humans, must maintain final authority over AI-driven recommendations. An AI, doesn't know about a student who missed a class because of a family emergency or why a particular student's draft is weaker than usual. They don't know when something sensitive or emotionally charged is happening, but you do. Educators do. And that context is a big part of keeping AI from drifting into harmful territory. I'm just going to wrap up here with a 3-question framework. I think this is really useful if you're considering using AI for a task. I'd start here and just say, will the AI output affect a student's trust, risk, or identity? If yes, you are treading in very dangerous territory. Do not use it unless human oversight is integrated at the most core level, and data protections are absolutely guaranteed. Outside of those really fundamental trust, risk, and identity issues, you can ask, does this task involve grading or assessments that influence high stakes outcomes? Like a grade can change a student's life. If it does, like, this AI must be explainable. It must be audited for bias, and it must be interpretable. There should be no world, where Barbara said, where we give somebody a grade and we can't tell them why. And then finally, is this AI being used to support learning, coaching, scaffolding, drafting, rather than replacing student thought? We're going to get into cognitive offloading and student thought in upcoming webinars. But if it is being used in these contexts, these are low stakes contexts where it's not going to change a person's life in a negative way, it can be completely appropriate to use AI so long as you're thinking in terms of inclusive design and clear ethical prompting. And with that, I want to hand over to Barbara to close us out with some examples of when AI has gone wrong, and then what I think is the most critical part of this webinar, the human loop.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, so examples of when it goes wrong. And I want to say that the pattern here is not just that like AI is dangerous. We know AI has extraordinary potential in education, but what you can see in these headlines is we see false accusations, privacy concerns, data breaches. And what we're looking at here isn't bad intent necessarily. It's good intentions, but pushed beyond what the technology can reliably do. And even well-meaning tools can end up feeling invasive and posing risk. Detection is another area where the stakes get high really quickly because we're talking about accusations of misconduct. If you look at the top headline here, a family was suing a school district because their child got penalized for AI use, but the school didn't have an AI policy. Or the case in Yale where a student was suspended for AI use, but he was a non-native English speaker. And we know from national audits that they can more likely be flagged with some detection systems. So deterring AI over reliance is really important, but not at the expense of fairness and trust, and ensuring that students aren't facing high stakes consequences from black box outputs that are hard to understand or contest. And this last set of headlines touches on a different type of challenge, so not privacy or detection, but integration. What happens when AI enters the classroom without enough conversation around it? In this top headline, you see film students trying to navigate what it means to be in a classroom that's integrating the very same technology that they see as a threat to their jobs, or students feeling betrayed by a teacher's undisclosed use of AI. What these stories show is that transparency is more than just policy alone. It's about relationships. It's about students and educators making sense of AI together. And that brings us to this human loop. And the human in the loop is not just a single role or simply moments of oversight. It's a network of shared responsibility. So technologists must design for that explainability that we've talked about, and institutions through the policies and accountability, and educators through modeling and dialogue, and students through their choices and their reflections. And you may not have a say in whether there's an institutional policy or if you're receiving official training. We certainly can't redesign the models or fix their biases. And even choosing which tools to allow or disallow can feel overwhelming. So I want to start this section just by acknowledging that and focusing on the part of the network that does remain firmly in the educator's hands. This visual comes from a 2025 review, which mapped documented risks across the AI and education landscape. And what stood out here to me was in the green education section. The teacher-student relationship is where risk is concentrated. And that's the core human loop. And the answer to that risk is not a technical solution, it's a relational one. And these relational elements are becoming more and more vital than ever. And it's where educators have the most leverage to shape how AI is used, interpreted, and situated inside of real learning. This Inside Higher Ed survey showed that there was basically a 50-50 divide between students who reported having a published policy and official training from their institutions, and 50% that felt they didn't have any clear understanding or confidence at all about AI use. But again, we see that the largest percentage of students that reported feeling confident said it was because of the direction of their teachers in class. So with that, I want to kind of pose another poll question to the audience. How are you currently approaching AI use and AI literacy with your students? So as that comes in, I'm going to keep moving to talk a little bit more about the human in the loop practice, and then we can look at those results in a second. There we go. So all of the things we just talked about, or did I skip an extra slide? Yes, I did, sorry. So the human in the loop is these relationships, the practices and conversations that help students to know how and why to use AI. And it includes the mentorship, modeling, the dialogue. But what I think is really important is that it extends beyond explicit instruction or policy or conversations about AI. It happens in the moments where AI isn't present at all. It's in the habits of inquiry and the human skills that are growing in importance as AI becomes more embedded. It's the assignments that ask students to think with each other. It's the literacy and critical thinking you've been teaching all along. It's investing in process over product. It's the relationships that you've been cultivating with your students. And of course, AI adds a whole new element of uncertainty to all of those areas. This multi-institutional study actually talked to students about how they were navigating generative AI in their day-to-day learning. And what stood out is that students are developing their own value systems around AI above institutional messaging. And they do feel a strong responsibility and ownership for their work and their learning. And at the same time, they're operating in that space of uncertainty. So I think here is that it's not just about rules or restrictions. Students need supportive environments where they can engage with AI. And really keeping in mind that if institutions teach only what not to do, students might learn that misuse by default. And I think it reminds us to bring students into the conversation, and not to just to define them as either bad actors wanting to cheat or passive victims on the road to brain rot. They do have strong opinions, and they're trying to navigate this uncertainty. And I think one of the ways we can guide students through that uncertainty is to acknowledge that uncertainty for ourselves. So when we're talking about ethical AI and human in the loop, I kept coming back to that uncertainty and what it means for this idea of AI literacy. I'm sure the last thing most people want to hear, educators want to hear, is that now you have to teach AI literacy, even more so because do we really even know what AI literacy is yet? And I love this comparison. This is from the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it talked about like a guidebook for tying knots. We know knots. They're tried and true. We know that bow lines are great for boating, and I don't know, figure eights are great for climbing. But if we think about AI, we really don't know yet. And I don't think that we should pretend to. We just know that there is a fascinating new rope, and people are bending it and tying it in a lot of different ways, but we don't know what's going to stick yet. And that's okay. I think we can lead with that uncertainty. So when I'm referring to AI literacy, I don't think it means that it needs to be a new course or a full curriculum. You don't need to be an expert, and no one really is yet. Even the people who have built these generative systems don't really understand why they do what they do. And it can start smaller by opening the conversation, emphasizing disciplinary expertise, which is still the anchor. Having enough discipline knowledge to question the output is still the most important skill to have there. So I'm wondering if we can see those poll results really fast before we dive into the next slide. So seeing a lot of people are embedding AI into assignments, and that's great to see, and that people are wanting to teach these AI literacy skills. So I think the piece here, I think a big part of that ethical AI strategy is about that relationships, that transparency, and bringing the tools into the classroom in the spirit of discovery and critical inquiry. So what I have here are just like a few lightweight ways to start building AI literacy organically within the existing assignments or with quick conversations, thinking aloud with your own experience, showing students how to check and edit the stored memory in their chatbots. If folks haven't done that yet, that's a really interesting thing to look at. What are these systems remembering about you, and how is that informing their output? But one activity I really love here is what I've called the prompt compare and critique. This I got from a study which showed how AI-supported writing assignments affect students' sense of voice. And in the study, students summarized an academic article. They used AI to get feedback or a rewrite, compared the AI's version to their own, and then collaboratively evaluated the output. And that final step, the group reflection, that's where students got some hands-on AI literacy practice. And what they shared in their observations was the students said things like, everyone sounds the same. We lose some of the words that identify ourselves and our uniqueness. There was also a piece written in the Yale Student Magazine recently, which hit on this like student self-discovery. It followed a student who decided on their own to stop using GPT. So not because of a policy, but because of their own experience. They decided not to use it because they realized how much learning they were missing out on by avoiding that productive struggle. And that's exactly, I think, the awareness that we can be cultivating is students understanding the limitations of AI and developing a sense of how and when to use it, not simply from a rule or policy. Those are important, but also giving students experience. And so to wrap up, before we go to questions, I just want to say that like as we think about that ethical AI, it's not about banning or glorifying the technology. It's not about being an AI expert. It's about bringing it in intentionally with your values and principles and helping students to learn to see it clearly, to situate it not as an expert, but as another voice in the room that they should evaluate. And I think at the heart of any strategy or implementation, it's the same human relationships, questions, reflective practices that have always anchored learning and what will carry students forward regardless of how AI evolves. So I think now we can open it up for questions, and I'll pass it back to Craig.
Yep, just before we jump into the questions, I want to situate us with regards to the other webinars. If you could jump forward a slide. So just as a reminder, this is part of a series of webinars. In part 1, we talked about what AI is. In part 2, we just talked about building ethical AI. And next month, we're going to talk about designing AI, specifically designing AI that we know can help improve student engagement and student mastery of content. So that's coming next. If we could just pop the next slide up. If you are interested in registering for that, when we pop the next slide up, there will be a QR code on the screen. There we go, the QR code loaded, great. So yeah, there'll be a link in the chat, QR code on the screen. I really hope that we can see you on December the 18th. And with that, Oliver, what's the Q&A looking like? Do you have any questions for us?
I certainly do. I think I'd like Craig to lob one over to you first. That feels pretty topical, actually. So there's been a lot of buzz this week in particular about the new ChatGPT for teachers from OpenAI and their release. So we've talked a lot today about an ethical framework. How do you see a release like that shaping the way institutions look and think about ethical AI use?
Oh, I think I just had a little internet blip. I did hear the question. So yeah, just for anyone who didn't see this announcement, I think it was still less than a day ago, OpenAI announced ChatGPT for teachers. What it is, just to be extremely transparent about this, is it could equally have been ChatGPT for lawyers, ChatGPT for engineers. It is not an education-specific thing. It is access to ChatGPT for free for teachers. And they've added the promise that they will not use student data to do things. So it is, with regards to the ethics thing, a good thing for the world. We talked about these 5 principles, and one of those principles is do no harm. And a part of doing no harm is not misusing students' data. OpenAI has now made the commitment we will not misuse student data. That said, it doesn't change anything with regards to the others. Like ChatGPT for teachers did not make the AI suddenly explainable in plain language, for example. And it's still entirely dependent upon the human being using it to make sure, and I'm just going to read off here, make sure that we're prioritizing the well-being of students above all else, making sure that we are a supplement, not a substitute for people, making sure that human beings are accountable. So I think ChatGPT for teachers is a really good thing. It represents OpenAI saying we will not misuse student data, but that is a small fraction of the ethical question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. One of the questions in the chat, Barbara, I think this is probably right in your wheelhouse, working with the AI team here at Packback is, for us, how are we addressing and improving our AI detection tools? And in a dynamic environment where capabilities around these generative AI models, double, call it every 7 months, and have all of the resources that they do into intrinsically being more human. What are we doing to stay ahead of the curve there and to make sure that we're able to implement this ethical framework that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, first, we are always evaluating, auditing, and trying to improve our detection system as these models have gotten more and more capable. So we definitely we make sure that our model is accurate, but regardless of how accurate our model is, we always have a bias towards the student. We want a very low false positive rate. We're not going to ever risk falsely identifying a student who spent time and effort writing something and then gets a AI flag. And I think more than that, I think is thinking ahead past this detection era, and being able to support not just detecting AI, but helping students develop the skills they need regardless of how AI develops, whether they're co-writing with AI or not. We want them to develop self-regulating skills and the critical thinking skills that are going to support them no matter where their learning journey or career takes them. And we've been working on something recently we're calling Engagement Insights, but that's trying to give a bigger window into the student's learning journey to give instructors that more context to make decisions about how a student approached their writing and to go alongside that detection score, but also to value that process and show students the value of that process so they can begin to invest in it and know that it's more than just what they put out there. It's about how they got there and the learning that takes place along the way.
Awesome. Thank you both. I believe we are right at time.
Thank you very much, everyone, for spending the time with us. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you all very much. I did see a couple questions in the chat that will materials be shared out after the fact? Yes, they will. You can check packback.co/webinars within the next 2 days to access this recording and previous recordings from this series. And really hope to see you in part 3 as well as we continue this series headed into the new year. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.